Welcome to our channel with new interesting episode. In 1973, a script was sent to NBC that could have completely changed the image of one of America's most beloved detectives, Columbo. This episode was different. It didn't follow the usual pattern. It showed Columbo going up against a murderer who had no clear motive, just pure evil. The network executives thought it was too dark for TV audiences at the time. They claimed people weren't ready for something that disturbing. But the truth behind why that episode was hidden for 50 years might be much darker than what they admitted. Today, we're revealing the real story behind Columbo, the hidden episode, and how one of TV's most iconic characters was almost left behind. In the early 1960s, Hollywood was going through a rough time. A writers' strike had shut down a lot of productions. Two struggling writers, Richard Levinson and William Link, were trying to figure out how to keep working. Instead of just waiting for the strike to end, they found a clever way around it. They noticed that live television wasn't affected by the strike rules. So they wrote a murder mystery called Enough Rope for NBC's live color show, The Chevy Mystery Show. They were desperate and rushed, even tricking their own agent just to get it sold. But in the middle of that messy process, they created something incredible, a strange, rumpled detective called Lieutenant Columbo. At the time, they didn't realize this character would become a TV legend. Columbo wasn't even entirely original. The writers were inspired by a character from Dostoevsky's novel Crime and Punishment, a detective named Porfiry Petrovich. He was soft-spoken, seemed harmless, but was secretly very smart. That's exactly the kind of detective they wanted to create. Instead of hiding the killer until the end, they decided to show the audience who did it right at the beginning. The tension would come not from figuring out who committed the crime, but from watching how Columbo would catch them. The very first time Columbo appeared on TV, he wasn't even played by Peter Falk. On July 31, 1960, actor Bert Freed played him in a live broadcast. He did a good job, showing a quiet and observant man. But the real magic hadn't happened yet. 2 years later, the story was turned into a play called Prescription, Murder, with actor Thomas Mitchell playing Columbo on stage. Audiences enjoyed it, even though it never made it to Broadway. Sadly, that would be Mitchell's last role before he passed away. Everything changed in 1968. NBC decided to turn Prescription, Murder into a TV movie. For the role of Columbo, they first approached actors like Lee J. Cobb and Bing Crosby. Both turned it down. Finally, they gave the part to Peter Falk. He wasn't the first choice, but he turned out to be perfect. Falk brought something new to Columbo, a strange charm combined with a sharp mind. In that first movie, Columbo actually looked pretty tidy. His hair was combed, his suit was neat, but one thing stood out, the famous raincoat. Falk had bought it himself for just $15 during a rainstorm in New York. He wore it in the movie and kept wearing it in future episodes. Surprisingly, the coat wasn't just a random find, it was actually made by a luxury Spanish brand. But for Falk, it simply looked right for Columbo. He also started bringing in his own wardrobe, his shoes, suits, even the old car Columbo drove. That beat-up Peugeot was chosen by Falk himself. All of it helped create a detective who felt real, not like a character dressed by a costume department. What made Columbo even more interesting was the way Falk played him. He wasn't just acting, he was playing mind games. Falk would often improvise during scenes. He might pause, mumble, or even act distracted to throw off the other actors. It worked perfectly. The actors playing the guilty characters would get annoyed or nervous, just like their characters were supposed to. Sometimes he'd pull out something totally unrelated, like a shopping list, instead of real evidence. Or he'd ask a silly question, like borrowing a pencil, to throw people off balance. These tricks weren't accidents, they were part of his method. The audience was in on it, but the characters weren't. That made Columbo fascinating to watch. And then there's his famous line, "Just one more thing," it wasn't originally a major part of the show. Levinson and Link admitted that they added it just to make a scene longer because they didn't want to rewrite the script. But it became Columbo's most famous move. It was usually the moment when the killer realized they were trapped. Columbo's full name was always a bit of a mystery. Some fans thought his first name was Frank because it appeared faintly on a badge, but the creators said they never officially gave him one. A trivia author once made up the name Philip Columbo to catch people copying his book, and even Trivial Pursuit believed it. He sued them for using it, but he lost. Still, the name stuck in fans' memories. Even at Columbo's nephew's wedding in the show, people just called him Lieutenant. Imagine not even your own family calling you by your first name. Behind the scenes, the show was just as intense as the stories it told. Every episode featured a new killer, and the casting team would consider dozens of actors for those parts. They even looked at big stars like Orson Welles. Peter Sellers was considered but asked for so much money they had to say no. Peter Falk himself sometimes turned people down, like Danny Kaye, though he never explained why. When Columbo became a full series in 1971, NBC executives were unsure. They worried that the show broke too many rules. At that time, TV shows had to grab the audience right away. But Columbo didn't even appear until nearly 30 minutes into the first episode. Executives thought viewers would get bored and change the channel. They called it the longest wait in TV history. But that delay became one of the show's most clever tricks. Instead of asking who did it, the show showed the murder up front. The audience got to see the plan in detail. Then they got to enjoy watching how Columbo would slowly break that plan apart. People thought this would ruin the suspense, but it made it even better. It wasn't about whether he'd catch the killer, it was about how. Columbo didn't rely on guns or car chases. He used gentle questions, common sense, and a sharp eye. He might notice a wine glass that wasn't washed properly or a thermostat that didn't match the time of day. And there was something deeper about the show, it dealt with class differences. Columbo wasn't rich. He drove an old car, wore the same wrinkled coat, smoked cheap cigars, and often mentioned his wife. Meanwhile, the people he investigated were powerful doctors, generals, CEOs, famous artists. They thought they were above the law. But Columbo never treated them like they were special. He'd make comments about their expensive taste or mention how his wife had something similar. It would throw them off and show their arrogance. The show quietly showed how the wealthy often believed they were untouchable, and Columbo proved they weren't. At one point, NBC tried to change the show. After just a few episodes, they asked the creators to make Columbo appear earlier and follow more traditional TV storytelling. But Levinson, Link, producer William Furman, and Peter Falk all refused. They were willing to quit rather than change what made the show special. It was a big risk, but it paid off. Viewers loved it. Ratings went up, and the network gave them creative freedom. Columbo first aired on September 15, 1971, as part of NBC's mystery movie lineup, sharing time with other detective shows. But it quickly became the favorite. Peter Falk's performance was a huge reason why. That season, he won an Emmy. Over the years, he won 4 more for playing Columbo, along with a Golden Globe. His messy appearance, soft voice, and clever tricks made the character unforgettable. And even though one dark episode was locked away for decades, the story of Columbo proves that sometimes the most powerful detective stories don't come from car chases or shootouts, but from a quiet voice, a wrinkled coat, and just one more question. He didn't need to act flashy or dramatic. Columbo always got the job done with calm persistence. He would just ask one more question, and somehow everything would fall apart for the killer. The way the show was structured helped with that. NBC's rotating format allowed longer episodes, sometimes up to 90 minutes, which gave the writers more time to develop the story and build suspense. It made the show feel more like a movie than a typical TV episode, and it worked so well that NBC moved it to Sunday nights where it became a ratings giant. Columbo wasn't just a success, it became the centerpiece of primetime television. What no one expected was how far the show would spread. It didn't just stay in the United States, it became a worldwide phenomenon. It was syndicated in 44 countries, and people everywhere connected with it. In Hungary, fans even built a statue of Columbo. In Romania, people were so upset when the show ended that Peter Falk had to record a message to explain that it wasn't banned or cancelled, it had simply ended. Even decades later, the BBC called it timeless. Columbo's quiet determination, his moral compass, and the way he brought down arrogant criminals mattered to audiences all over the world. Columbo also became a magnet for talent. Being the villain on the show became an honor for actors. Big names lined up to play killers. Jack Cassidy played a killer 3 times. William Shatner did it twice. Patrick McGoohan not only acted in multiple episodes but even won Emmys for his roles. Leonard Nimoy, Robert Culp, George Hamilton, even Martin Landau played twin murderers in one episode. It wasn't just the actors. Behind the camera, the show attracted impressive names. A young 24-year-old Steven Spielberg directed the first regular episode. Peter Falk immediately knew Spielberg was destined for bigger things. In the summer of 1973, something unusual happened. Brian De Palma, a film director known for disliking television, decided to write a Columbo episode. This was the same De Palma who had just made Sisters, a thriller inspired by Hitchcock. But he admired Columbo so much that he teamed up with his friend Jay Cox, a respected film critic, and they submitted a script. To stay anonymous, they even used the fake name Joseph P. Gillis, a character from Sunset Boulevard, like they were part of an inside joke. What made it even stranger was the timing. A writer's strike had left the show in need of scripts. De Palma's story was bold. It featured a character named Quentin Lee, a filmmaker who murders a talk show host on camera to prove that a crime without a motive could be perfect. He picked his victim by throwing a dart at a list of celebrities and chose someone he thought was fake. He even planned to make a documentary about the murder, with Columbo as an unknowing part of it. The story became very self-aware and experimental. It even included film students following Columbo with cameras, one of them named Spielberg, a nod to the real director. But the timing was off. Another script, Double Exposure, was also submitted during the strike and was easier to produce. It featured a killer using subliminal messages to commit murder. De Palma's script was visually complex and layered, and the producers liked it, but they didn't have the time or budget to pull it off. Still, parts of his idea were later used. A similar student camera crew appeared in an episode called Mind Over Mayhem, including a character named Steven Spielberg, spelled slightly differently, but clearly inspired by De Palma's script. The problem with De Palma's story was its tone. Columbo usually had killers with understandable motives, money, jealousy, revenge. De Palma's villain had none of that. He just wanted to make a point, much like the killers in Hitchcock's Rope, who believed they were intellectually superior. But Columbo was never about that kind of cold, abstract villainy. The producers likely felt that audiences wouldn't relate to such a disturbing character. Some people even imagined John Lithgow in the role, but worried he was too tall and intense for television. In the end, the episode was shelved due to production struggles and creative disagreements. Columbo had a formula, and it worked. The killer was revealed from the start, and the real mystery was how Columbo would catch them with patience, politeness, and sharp insight. Then came 1992, and the show changed drastically with an episode called No Time to Die. For the first time, there was no murder at the beginning. Instead, it started with panic, chloroform, and a kidnapping during a honeymoon. It felt more like a horror film than Columbo. He joined a police task force, carried a gun, and raced against time. The climax involved gunfire, something completely out of character for the show. Many fans called it the worst episode ever. But it wasn't the only time the show veered off course. When it returned in 1989 after 11 years, it came back with Murder, Smoke and Shadows, set in Hollywood. The villain was a flashy young director who acted more like a caricature of Spielberg. There was even a 10-minute scene of Columbo struggling on a waterbed, and the final reveal had police jumping out in costumes with spotlights, more like a stage show than a mystery. As strange as it was, later fans defended it, especially compared to what came next. That same year, another episode called Murder, a self-portrait got even weirder. Instead of solving the case with clues, Columbo interpreted bizarre dream sequences, including meat in a sink, pocket watches in teacups, and a French uncle who somehow meant Mon Le. The killer was an arrogant artist who lived with his ex-wife and current wife until one of them died. It was full of symbols and psychological twists, but the logic barely held together. Still, the portrait Columbo received at the end stuck with fans even if the plot didn't. By 2003, the final episode was Columbo Likes the Nightlife. It tried to pull the detective into the modern world. Gone were the quiet homes and cigar smoke, now it was loud music, neon lights, and nightclubs. Columbo wore a feather boa, wandered into raves, and even pulled a toenail clipping from a toilet for evidence. The story involved a cover-up and a sleazy tabloid journalist, but people mostly remember how surreal the episode felt. Some viewers appreciated the effort to modernize him, but many just missed the old days. Not all missteps were intentional. Back in 1972, Peter Falk tried directing an episode called Blueprint for Murder. The shoot was difficult. The producers chose a real construction site just to make it harder. Falk called Spielberg for help and even paid extras out of his own pocket when the studio refused. The result was uneven. The murder wasn't shown, the pacing was awkward, and the music felt out of place. Falk was trying to juggle acting and directing, and it didn't quite work. He never directed again. When Columbo Likes the Nightlife aired in 2003, many thought it was the end. But behind the scenes, there were plans for one last case. In 2007, Universal Studios quietly began developing Columbo's last case, timed to mark the 40th anniversary of the character. A 102-page script was completed. It was a clever story involving a murder using sound as the weapon. Columbo picked up on a tiny clicking noise that unraveled the case. The script even had a cameo from Larry King, echoing the days when celebrities like Johnny Cash or Janet Leigh made surprise appearances. Everything was set up for a classic final episode. But ABC, the network that had aired Columbo's TV movies, didn't want it. Executives said no one wanted to watch a movie with an 80-year-old lead. Even though Falk had played Columbo well into his 70s, and fans still loved him, the network refused. Universal tried reaching out to international investors, hoping the character's global popularity would help, but it wasn't enough. Then came the most painful part. In 2007, Peter Falk's health began to decline after dental surgery. His memory started to slip. In 2008, it was revealed he had Alzheimer's. Soon, he couldn't even remember playing Columbo. His daughter testified that he didn't recognize familiar faces, not even hers. By 2009, it was clear the final episode would never be made. The farewell that had been planned so carefully would stay on paper. In 2011, Peter Falk died at 83 from complications of pneumonia and Alzheimer's. With him, Columbo ended. Peter Falk didn't just act like Columbo, he was Columbo. He wore his own clothes, brought his own raincoat, and insisted on getting every line right. He didn't care about deadlines. If a scene wasn't perfect, he would stop and redo it, even if it delayed everything. He took the character seriously, even if he didn't always show it. That famous raincoat wasn't from the costume department, it came from his closet. His mumbling, wandering style was carefully planned to throw people off and keep their reactions real. But not everyone got along with him. When casting the episode Negative Reaction, Danny Kaye's name came up. Most people would have jumped at the chance to cast him, but Falk refused. No one knows why. Maybe he didn't want Columbo to feel like a comedy. Maybe it was a personal clash. But Falk didn't back down. If he thought someone didn't fit, they were out. While Falk fought for creative control, the writers had their own struggles. Columbo's format, showing the killer at the beginning, was completely different from other crime shows. Writers had to work backward and couldn't rely on shocking endings. It was mentally exhausting. NBC once invited 60 professional writers to watch the pilot, only 2 wanted to write for the show. The writer's room became a high-pressure environment. They'd spend whole days trying to fix storylines. One man, Larry Cohen, stopped by to say hello and ended up writing an episode because he solved a plot problem no one else could. When NBC extended episodes to 2 hours, things got even harder. Scripts were filled with unnecessary scenes just to hit the runtime, and some fans felt the quality dropped. But then, something amazing happened. Decades later, Columbo became popular all over again. Between 2020 and 2023, there was a 300% spike in streaming. During the pandemic, people found comfort in Columbo's slow, thoughtful storytelling. Young viewers connected with the show's quiet rebellion against the rich. Most of the killers were wealthy and smug, and Columbo brought them down with soft-spoken brilliance. Social media helped too. TikTok, Twitter, and fan-created videos brought new life to the character. Memes spread fast. People joked about his never-seen wife, his old car, his famous line, "Just one more thing." A Twitter account imagined him as a 3-inch-tall detective solving tiny crimes. Columbo became part of internet culture. Peter Falk won 5 Emmys for the role, and never stopped trying to improve the character. Even today, fans still debate, was Columbo just lucky, or secretly a genius? Maybe he was both. That was the magic. You could never quite figure him out until it was too late.